I never thought something as simple as hosting a gathering would turn into a neighborhood drama. It all started on a sunny weekend, the kind of day where the air feels light and people want to sit outside, laugh, and share stories. My wife and I had planned this event for weeks. We weren't throwing just any party. No, we were hosting a group of veterans, men and women who had given pieces of their lives for the freedom the rest of us enjoy so casually. Some of them were old friends of mine from service. Others were people I'd met through local community events. All of them carried memories and scars, both visible and invisible, of their time serving the country. Our backyard was decorated, with nothing more than picnic tables, folding chairs, and a couple of grills. We weren't going overboard, just burgers, hot dogs, and a cooler of cold drinks. The laughter of veterans filled the air as they told stories that only those who've been there would understand. There was a sense of brotherhood, of belonging, of respect, but of course not everyone sees things that way. Karen lived 2 houses down. If you've ever had one of those neighbors, you know exactly what I mean. She was the type to peek from behind her curtains whenever someone parked on the street, the type to keep track of how often you mowed your lawn, and the type to call the homeowners association if your trash cans were left out a little too long. And on that day, she must have been watching us too closely. I was flipping burgers when I noticed her standing on her porch, arms crossed, a scowl painted on her face. She wasn't just curious, she was angry. At first I brushed it off, thinking maybe she just didn't like the noise. After all, veterans tend to be loud when they're swapping stories, laughing, and enjoying themselves. Then, about 20 minutes later, I noticed a strange car pull up. It wasn't one of our guests. The door opened, and out stepped an HOA representative, clipboard in hand, tie far too tight for a Saturday afternoon. My stomach sank because I knew immediately what had happened. Karen had reported us. He walked straight into my yard with the kind of authority that made it clear he thought he owned the place. Without even a hello, he started talking. "We've had a complaint about the number of guests you're hosting. According to HOA guidelines, events that exceed a certain number of attendees must be approved in advance." I looked around at the gathering. There were maybe 20 people at most. Veterans sitting together, talking quietly, some with plates in their hands. It wasn't a wild party. There was no loud music, no alcohol-fueled chaos, just community and respect. I told him calmly, "We're hosting veterans. These are my guests, and this is my property. We're not causing any trouble here." But Karen wasn't satisfied with sending the HOA guy. She came strutting over, her voice dripping with superiority. "I told you this neighborhood has rules," she said. "This many people isn't allowed. I don't care who they are." That was the moment I felt my patience start to wear thin. You see, I don't usually get angry easily, but disrespecting veterans, the very people who gave her the right to live in peace in that nice suburban neighborhood, that's where I draw the line. Still, I didn't want to cause a scene in front of my guests. So I tried to keep my voice level. "Karen, they're not just people. They're veterans, friends, brothers and sisters. If you can't respect that, at least respect the fact that we're not doing anything to harm you." But she wouldn't. "Stop." She pointed to the HOA representative and demanded, "Write him up. He's violating the rules." That's when the laughter around me died down, and all eyes turned toward the confrontation. Some of the veterans were shaking their heads. A few muttered under their breath about how ridiculous this was. One of them, a man who had lost a leg in combat, tried to roll his wheelchair forward, but I raised my hand gently to signal him not to get involved. This was my battle to fight. Inside, though, I was boiling. And the irony wasn't lost on me. Karen was talking about too many guests while standing in the middle of men and women who had risked everything so she could live freely. The HOA guy cleared his throat nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. He mumbled something about guidelines again, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. He didn't want to be here. He was just doing his job. That's when Karen snapped, "If you don't handle this, I'll call the police. We have rules here. And I won't let my neighborhood turn into a circus." That was it. That was the breaking point, because at that moment, I realized she wasn't just trying to ruin a gathering, she was insulting every single veteran sitting in my yard. And she was threatening to drag the police into it over nothing. I took a deep breath, walked over to her slowly, and said, "Karen, you really don't want to go down this road." Her eyes narrowed. "And why is that?" she sneered. I reached into my wallet and pulled something out. A small, well-worn badge. Not just any badge. Mine. The one I'd carried during my years of service. The one that symbolized not only authority, but the sacrifice and responsibility I had shouldered. Held it up, and for the first time that day, her smug expression faltered. And that's where things really started to shift. I could see her standing at the end of the driveway, arms folded, her phone pressed to her ear like she was calling in a full-scale crime scene. She kept pacing back and forth, glaring at the people laughing and enjoying themselves in my backyard. My guests had done nothing wrong, but she had that look, the kind of person who thrives on control, on making everyone else miserable because she's never happy herself. I tried to ignore it for a while. My wife whispered to me, "Just let it go. She'll tire herself out." But I knew Karen wasn't the type to stop. Sure enough, within 15 minutes, 2 police cruisers rolled slowly up the street and parked right in front of my house. The chatter on the porch went quiet. Veterans who had served in combat, men and women who had dealt with the harshest realities life could throw at them, now sat in silence because a nosy neighbor couldn't mind her business. The officers stepped, out calm but clearly uncomfortable, like they knew this wasn't a real emergency. They asked who owned the house, and I stepped forward. "That would be me," I said, steady but polite. Karen came storming down the sidewalk like she had just saved the neighborhood from destruction. "There," she shouted, pointing at me. "That's him. Too many people, too much noise. He's breaking HOA rules and disturbing the peace." One of the officers sighed, looked at me, then looked at her. "Ma'am, can we confirm what exactly the issue is?" he asked. Karen wasted no time. "Look at all these people. They're probably drinking, causing trouble, and God knows how many cars are parked illegally. This is unacceptable." She looked around, expecting cheers of support from invisible neighbors who were definitely not out there. I calmly explained, "Officer, today's gathering is to honor veterans. Many of the people here have risked their lives for this country. We're not blasting music. We're not blocking streets. Everyone's inside or in the backyard, just sharing food and stories." The other officer glanced into the backyard. He saw the quiet, respectful scene. A few older men in uniform jackets, families chatting, a table of food. Nothing close to what Karen was trying to paint. He nodded and turned back to me. "Looks fine to me." Karen's face twisted. She wasn't expecting the officers to side, with reason. She stomped closer and hissed, "You can't just do whatever you want. Too many guests is against HOA policy. I pay dues to make sure people like you don't ruin this neighborhood." That's when I pulled out the binder. I had printed copies of the HOA rules months ago because I knew Karen's type always tried to twist them to her advantage. I flipped to the page and held it up. "Nowhere in here does it limit how many guests I can have at my private residence. As long as there's no excessive noise, I'm well within my rights." The officers leaned over, read the page, and nodded. One of them even chuckled under his breath. Karen was furious. "So, that's it? You're just going to let him break the rules?" she demanded. "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, "we don't enforce HOA rules. That's a civil matter. From what I see, there's no law being broken here." You could almost see the steam coming out of her ears. She turned to the crowd in the backyard, hoping someone would back her up, but all she saw were polite smiles and quiet stares from men and women who had fought battles she could never imagine. One of the veterans, an older gentleman with a cane, stood up and said in a calm voice, Ma'am, we fought so you'd have the right to complain, but today maybe you could show some respect. That shut her up for a moment, but not for long. Karen stormed off toward her house, muttering under her breath. The officers shook my hand before leaving, telling me to have a good evening. The mood in the backyard started to ease again, but I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to back down just because the police didn't side with her. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, she came back with a clipboard in hand, jotting things down like she was building a case for trial. She circled the street, counted cars, peered over fences, and even tried to take photos of people. That's when my patience began to thin. I had been calm, polite, even respectful, but watching her harass my guests, people who deserved peace, not suspicion, was pushing me to my limit. I knew I had a decision to make. I could let her keep digging her hole, or I could put a stop to this once and for all. And believe me, I had something she didn't know about yet. Something that would change the entire game the moment I revealed it. But I wasn't ready to play that card just yet. No. I wanted her to show just how far she was willing to go. And when she crossed that line, and she would, I'd be ready. Karen didn't stop. By now, most people would have realized they'd embarrassed themselves, but not her. She doubled down. Every half hour, she came back out with another excuse to interfere. First, she claimed the cars parked on the street were blocking her view of traffic. Then she argued that we must have been drinking alcohol and disturbing the peace. Later, she even tried to say the smell of barbecue was offensive. It would have been funny if it wasn't so insulting. The veterans, though, handled it with the kind of calm only people who had seen real battles could maintain. One of them, a woman who had served overseas, leaned over and whispered to me, "Don't let her rattle you. People like that want to drag you down. Stay steady." Her words stuck with me. But Karen wasn't just irritating, she was escalating. At one point, she walked right up to my backyard gate and tried to push it open. She was actually going to step onto my property uninvited. That's when I finally moved. I walked over, pulled the gate closed, and said firmly, "Karen, this is my property. You need to leave." She gasped, clutching her pearls like I had just threatened her. "How dare you? This whole neighborhood has rights. I have rights. You can't shut me out." She was loud enough for everyone to hear. The veterans stopped their conversations, turning to watch. She loved the spotlight, and now she had it. I kept my voice calm. "Karen, you've called the police, you've taken photos, you've tried to disrupt this gathering, but you've crossed the line. I'm asking you one final time to leave us alone," she sneered. "Or what? You'll call the police? Go ahead. I'll tell them you threatened me. I'll tell them this entire party is out of control." That's when I decided it was time. I looked at the crowd and then back at her. "Karen," I said slowly, "you don't know who you're dealing with tonight. Do you see these men and women here? They aren't just any guests. They're veterans. They've fought for this country, they've defended your freedom, and they deserve respect. This isn't just a backyard party, it's an event officially recognized by the local Veterans Association." Her eyes darted nervously. She wasn't expecting that. "So what?" she scoffed, but her voice wavered. I pulled out my phone and showed her an email from the city itself. It was a confirmation letter acknowledging the event as part of a community initiative to honor veterans. That meant permits had been granted, parking allowances approved, and the gathering was legally protected. Karen froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She had spent the entire day trying to prove I was breaking the rules, only to find out that I had the city's full support. The veterans clapped. A few chuckled. One older gentleman shook his head and said, "Ma'am, maybe it's time you stop fighting the wrong battles." Karen's face turned red, then pale, then red again. She sputtered, This isn't fair. You should have told me." I raised an eyebrow. "Told you?" "Karen, I don't owe you an explanation for hosting people in my home, and certainly Not for honoring the people who fought so you could live free in yours. She stormed off again, but this time there was no fire in her steps. She didn't come back with her clipboard. She didn't call the police. She didn't try to take photos. For once, Karen had been silenced. Not by anger, not by confrontation, but by the undeniable truth. The mood lifted instantly. The veterans returned to their stories. Families laughed again. The air felt lighter, like the dark cloud she had cast. Over the evening had finally drifted away. Later that night, after everyone had left and the yard was quiet, I sat down with my wife on the porch. She asked me if I thought Karen would try something else in the future. I smiled and shook my head. Oh, she might, but now she knows I'm not someone who's unprepared. She knows we stand together, and that's something she'll never be able to fight against. The next morning, I found something surprising. On my doorstep was a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. I may not agree with how you do things, but I see now what last night meant. Don't expect us to be friends, but I'll stay out of your way. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was as close as Karen could get. And in a strange way, that was enough. Because in the end, this wasn't about winning against Karen. It was about standing up for the people who deserved recognition, no matter who tried to interfere. It was about showing respect to those who gave everything for us. So if you've ever dealt with a neighbor like Karen, remember this. Sometimes the best way to shut down negativity is not by shouting louder, but by standing taller. And that night, surrounded by heroes who had already proven their strength, we all stood a little taller together.